I can sort of see you. Yeah. It's slightly like Big Brother is watching you. I'm Jacob Rees Mogg, and I've been involved in some political controversy. I'm afraid, and this is probably a sin, I quite enjoy winding people up.
I hope I don't get a cease and desist letter from Johnny Bowden. Could you please not wear my clothes? You awful Tory right-wing fox-hunting Brexiteer.
Would you consider you and your family to be posh?
We have quite posh accents, so yeah, if we're being real, we're quite posh, yeah.
11 cabinet ministers are facing losing their seats.
Vote the Tory
Nice to see you.
I will be over the moon if Rees-Mogg is gone.
Thank you so much. Extraordinary things can happen, and one should never give up until the last minute.
Worse result at a general election than John Major's defeat in 1997.
I'm not a dog, I don't lick my wounds. Life goes on. What's next should always be the question.
In Somerset, we have a mansion.
Sean does everything that needs to be done in a busy household.
I'm going out to get some graffiti.
He's nicer than what I thought he would be. He does like his boxers being ironed.
That's what you pay your wages for, isn't it?
I'm just lazy, that's all.
Was it love at first sight?
No. Also, I didn't tell him that.
How would you describe your dad?
Funny. He's very unfunny.
Oh, my goodness. The wrong way. I'm well aware that there are risks in reality TV.
Let's go to Disney.
I don't want to go to Disneyland at all. I think this would be a rather different kettle of fish, actually, from the Kardashians.
Jacob Rees Mogg joins us in the Daily Tea studio. Ordinarily, Kamal would be asking how do you take your tea, but you've already asked for a black coffee. Are you not a tea drinker?
Very rarely. Much prefer coffee.
And if you did have tea, would it be Builders or Earl Grey?
Oh, I don't like Earl Grey. It's got sort of funny flavour to it. Ordinary tea.
Yeah, we don't like Earl Grey. Well, I say we. Do you like
No,
Earl
I don't mind an Earl Grey, but I know it's newfangled and modern, Jacob.
We had
That's
a go
dangerous,
at,
yes.
Yes,
we had a go at
dangerous.
Tom Tugendhat because he chose Earl Grey as a default, and we didn't think that was right.
No.
In etiquette terms, is that right or wrong, to just pour Earl Grey as if it's standard?
Well, I think if people like Earl Grey, they can have it. I wouldn't be a particular judge of people on whether they like Earl Grey or not. I just personally don't much like it because it's got that funny taste to it.
Can we just pause on the effort that has been made for you, Jacob, by the Daily Tea team? We have bought croissant because we're doing this interview over breakfast. We brought some croissant in. There's a doily underneath the teapot, which is a very it's a silver tray.
We never put on a silver tray. It's because
so
you're
I just
here.
hope, Jacob, you realise the efforts that have been gone to welcome you in the sort of way that you are accustomed.
Well, I'm very grateful, but I thought the Daily Telegraph ran to the highest standards
Yes,
anyway.
you thought this was every morning.
I thought this was every morning, yes.
Not on this podcast, unfortunately. Standard slip. Let me have a slurp of my tea. So Kamal and I were discussing yesterday you as a reality TV star. And it's not without its risk, is it? We were both saying, would you do this? Would you open up your lives, your marriage and your children to TV cameras for how long? How long were they with you?
Just under 6 months.
Why did you do it?
Well, when I was first asked about it over a year ago now, I thought it was going to be much more political. So my initial discussions, once I realised it wasn't a spoof, I initially thought it was likely to be a spoof. Why would anybody want to do this with me? It was going to be about my work in Parliament, my work in the constituency, and that would have been the mainstay of it, then with a bit of family at the end. Then the general election was called much earlier than anyone anticipated. So instead of it being 6 months filming, ending with the general election, it was 6 months filming, starting with the general election. But then the general election was done and very much from a Tory point of view dusted. And so it ended up changing in the process. But in terms of reality TV as a concept, it's been very helpful for other politicians. I was very impressed by the success Nigel made of going into the jungle, which was very important to his election result in July, when he had a much wider appeal than he might have had if he hadn't done it. Now, when he did it, I thought it was a crazy thing for him to do as a serious politician. It's certainly not something I would want to do. But I realised that if you want to do things in politics, people need to know who you are.
Have you been able to watch all the episodes? Camilla and I have been lucky enough to be able to watch the first 2, but no more. And how do you think you've come across, and your wife and children as well?
It's always very difficult to mark one's own homework, so to speak. I think looking at it from episode 1 to 5, Helena, as I always expected, comes across brilliantly. I think you can make the comparison to At Home with the Furies, where Mrs. Fury comes across exceptionally well, and Helena likewise comes across the person who makes sure everything actually works in a busy and sometimes chaotic family. Mary, who pretty much has an episode to herself, episode 4, I'm very proud of. Of course, I'm proud of my daughter and proud of all my children, but that's absolutely charming. And then Sean and Nanny come across as real characters within the programme.
Just to explain, that's your nanny that was your nanny when
That's
you
right.
were a little boy?
She predates me in the family. She's been with us 59 years.
She does. And she ever going to retire, Veronica?
That's a rude word.
I know.
I think we're before the watershed. We can't use words like that.
And then Sean is, how would you describe him? He's your right-hand man, really, in Somerset.
Sean does absolutely everything in Somerset, yes.
I agree, actually, that I think Helena particularly shines out of this, and also the children, who are adorable. And they're kind of broken up. Your 6 children are broken up into two pairs of 3 kids, because you've got your 3 younger children that are all still in day school, and then you've got your 3 older children who we see a little bit less of because they're boarding. How did they feel about the idea of cameras coming into your lives? Because to be fair to you, you've always had a habit of including the children on campaign trails or in your political life. I remember I once said to you, there was this impression perhaps of your father, the late Times editor, William Rees Mogg, being a very austere figure who thought that children should be seen and not heard. But that's actually not the Rees Mogg way, is it?
No, not at all. It's lovely having children around, and if they come with you to things, as a politician, you see more of your children than you otherwise would. How did they feel about it? When it was first proposed, and we thought probably it's still a bit of a joke, they thought it was very exciting. Some of them carried on thinking that, so my elder 2 boys were a bit more cautious as it came to be the reality. Mary was all for it. The little ones took part in it happily, and I think rather loved it.
Did you worry that doing a reality television show, you've had, a lot of aggression towards you in the street at times, very uncomfortable people insulting you, and that comes across in some of the episodes. Did you worry that you were going to put yourself back in that type of situation, and that actually a period of slightly more quiet maybe from you and the family might have been more protective of your family?
Well, I think if you're a politician, you must expect people to disagree with you strongly if you want to make any contribution to the public debate. If you just go along with the platitudes and the consensus, then nobody will complain. But if you have strong views, people will object. And that's the point of politics. Otherwise, you don't achieve anything. You don't stand for anything. So I've never particularly worried about that. And it was at its worst around the Brexit period, with the period not when we were voting on Brexit, but when we were voting on how to implement Brexit, when temperatures were most heightened. I think it's a bit calmer than it was then. And from the point of view of my children, yes, of course we thought about that. And it seemed to me that because the surname Rees-Mogg is unusual, they are tarred with that particular brush already, and that it's not going to make a great deal of difference.
Mary talks about in some of the comments there about going through the Brexit process, and she makes it. Your family come across, as you say, Camilla, it's very warm, and it is lovely to get an idea of how you operate as a family. But she does say through the Brexit campaign that her friends would come up to her and say, "Your daddy hates foreigners," and this idea that your children have had to carry a little bit of that burden of the Rees-Mogg name because of some of the political positions you've taken.
Yes, I mean, they have, and we've always tried to warn them that that would be the case. Indeed, even nieces and nephews have had people criticise them for my political views, which seems particularly unfair as they're not directly responsible.
When it comes to the perception of you, I mean, some people have said, often it's come up in the documentary actually, or the reality show, I should say, you're one of the most divisive politicians in recent history. Is that an accurate description?
I think that's somewhat overstated. I can think of people who are a good deal more divisive than I am.
For instance?
Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay. But then, second of all, there's always been this criticism of you, and maybe it was exemplified in the scenes in Parliament that enraged Caroline Lucas, the former leader of the Greens, and others when you were lounging around on the benches and all the rest of it, that you are out of touch. And yet, to be fair, in the show, there is a sense to which people can really identify with the family scene. You know, it doesn't really matter what your background is. We can identify with young children crawling over sofas and hiding underneath tables and playing on Nintendo Switches. I mean, maybe that might surprise people about the Rees-Moggs. Are you out of touch?
I am sceptical of this idea of in touch. I think that everybody leads a different life. And there is this basically socialist idea, collectivist idea, that the masses lead the same life. They all lead identical lives, and politicians should lead those lives so they understand the masses. This is absolute nonsense. When you go around knocking on people's doors, campaigning, meeting people round about, everybody leads a different life with some items in common. And some of those items in common are things that you see in the film, such as children have to be got to school, children play, children who get told not to throw balls about the house, throw balls about the house. These are very familiar things, but nobody leads an identical life. So this concept of, are you leading the life everybody else leads, is fundamentally false.
Do you think you achieved your purpose to give a bit more of an insight? I know you said everything changed because of the election, but to get a bit more of an insight into actual politics and political families. Do you think that actually happened through the films? Because I got a sense, Camilla, I don't know what you felt, that you're seeing what is life like for an English aristocratic family. That's what I felt I got out of watching the programmes, which are very, very enjoyable. I'm not sure I got a huge amount of politics out of it.
Well, I wouldn't call ourselves aristocratic. We're a good Somerset yeoman stock. That's what the Rees-Moggs are. And
Lady-in-Lord, yes. Okay. Yes.
Your wife is very aristocratic.
My wife's a top Tory top.
Shall we say that your wife is both posher and probably
You've married up.
I married
richer
well.
than you? You are punching upwards.
I've unquestionably married well. Yes, I think anybody watching the films will realise that. I think with politics there are sort of different parts of it. And that one of the things about politics is that to be able to make your arguments, people need to have some idea of who you are. Otherwise, you don't get invited on to make them. So why have you invited me on today? Because of the film. We will touch on politics, at least to some extent. I'm doing Question Time tonight. Well, part of the reason they invite me on when I'm no longer a Member of Parliament is because of an element of name recognition. And therefore, politics comes in different ways, but that to be effective in politics, people have to know who you are.
In terms of losing your North East Somerset seat, the election's called on May the 22nd. Rishi Sunak's out in Downing Street, soaking wet. We all need to just have a moment now for his tailor. But when did you really know that you were losing that seat? Because when I was watching episodes 1 and 2, the person that knows from the very beginning is Helena. Helena's really pragmatic about it. And I think there's a sense to which you, as the politician in the hot seat, so to speak, trying your best to campaign, keeping the wonderful Margaret Brewer busy and all of your activists, you're having to put a good spin on it. But I've got this sense, particularly episode 1, that your wife knows from the moment that election's called that you're not winning that seat.
Yes, absolutely. She was quite clear. And I knew as well. I wrote to my children at boarding school on House of Commons writing paper, saying this is the last time I will write to you on House of Commons writing paper.
When was that?
That was the moment the election was called, because you can't use the paper after the dissolution. And the rules allow, just for the record, you to use a modest amount of paper for personal but not business usage. So I was using that, though I always paid for my own stamp when writing to my children, just so that people don't get worried about parliamentary expenses. Indeed, I always paid for an element of my own writing paper so that nobody can complain even on that thing. And about halfway through the campaign, though this isn't on the film, Margaret and I had a conversation where we'd both been pretending to each other that we thought there was some chance of winning because we didn't want to demoralise the other one. We all knew. It was obvious you were going to lose. But when you are the standard bearer in a campaign, you can't go around with a long face saying we're all doomed. You have to go around saying we've got to get every vote that we can.
There's lots of shots of you walking and campaigning and knocking on people's doors, and there's one interaction you have with one of your constituents, and he says you've gone too far to the right, and you say in response, I wish that were actually true. I mean, what do you put it down to? From the film, you can see that a lot of former Conservative voters have just given up on you. They just say, I'm not voting for that lot anymore. You touch on the possible betting scandal, which came halfway through the election campaign. Do you think it was because lots of voters thought you were too right-wing, hadn't kept your promises, or that you weren't right-wing enough? Because that was what people were talking to you about.
Well, look where the votes went. So the Tories lose roughly 7 million votes, 4 million go to Reform, 2.3 million stay at home, 700,000 go to the left. That tells you that we weren't Conservative enough. We needed to be a Conservative party, but what were we fiddling around with? We hadn't got immigration under control. Indeed, it was absolutely out of control. The budget that we had, Jeremy Hunt's last budget, could pretty much have been given by Rachel Reeves. We weren't doing Conservative things. Of course, people were fed up. It was a very unexciting campaign. We had that ridiculous idea bounced out on us about national service. The Conservative Party does not believe that the state has the right to direct labour except in time of war. And suddenly we had this crazy policy dropped on us from nowhere, which I went through all sorts of verbal contortions not to criticise during the election campaign.
But this is what has always stumped me. You obviously opposed vehemently Theresa May, particularly when you felt that her Chequers deal was a dud. You then go on to support Boris Johnson. I absolutely appreciate for pro-Brexit reasons. But a lot of the policies that he advocated, indeed we were discussing them in this very studio yesterday, because we were talking about the ZEV problem with electric cars and net zero and how that's actually cost now 1,000 people in Luton at Vauxhall their jobs. Those were all left-wing policies championed by Boris Johnson. You had this absolutely unwavering support of Johnson, even though he has been, I think, quite accurately described by Sir Graham Brady, the former head of the 1922 committee, as, quotes, the most left-wing prime minister in recent memory.
I'm not sure that's right or fair. Yes, he was in favour of the green agenda, but he was in favour of the green agenda in times of prosperity. There was nobody really publicly opposing the green agenda until the gas price went up once Russia invaded Ukraine and pigeons were coming home to roost. Because it was, I've always thought, the green issue was one of rich nations when times were good. When you suddenly discover that it's making the country cold and poor, the demand for it declines. Nobody wants any cost for being environmentally friendly. And the Boris view was, it's not costing us anything at the moment, let's be green, this is all very nice. And then that changed, but by the time it changed, he only had 3 months left in office. I think, if you look at what he used to write for the Telegraph about green issues, he's no more of a green fanatic than I am. And I think he went along with something that there wasn't any real opposition to until post-2022. And now it's building up. Now people are seeing the consequences. And we will have to get rid of these ridiculous anti-car measures, anti-petrol and diesel car measures. Otherwise, we're ruining a very good industry in this country.
But it wasn't just the pro-net zero policy. It was also, he was intensely relaxed about mass migration, and that partly cost you your seat because of the number of voters in your constituency that turned to Reform. He wasn't particularly vocal on our ever-increasing tax burden. And, of course, he advocated lockdown, which I would imagine the libertarian in you completely opposes.
Well, let's take those. Lockdown, I came more and more to the conclusion lockdown was a terrible idea. I accepted the first one was essential. Boris was under enormous pressure from the experts who were saying if he didn't lock down, he was going to kill people. Now, I don't think that his natural instinct was to lock people down. I also think the lockdowns would have been worse under another leader. That if you look at what other members of the quartet who were deciding this were saying to him, Matt Hancock wanted us practically all locked away. And so I think Boris did his best under very difficult circumstances. In terms of taxation, the tax rises came from Rishi Sunak as his Chancellor, and I opposed these within the Cabinet, as did one or two others. Boris wasn't at all keen on them, but he was being told by his Chancellor this is what he had to do, and he wasn't in a position to change his Chancellor. Mass migration, I think mass migration, there is a mistake made for good reasons which has bad consequences. That is to say, after COVID, there is a thought that there is an enormous shortage of labour and that this will make the inflationary problem worse and that it will stop economic growth in this country. That was fundamentally wrong, but that led to the very high numbers coming in 22, 23. I don't think that was Boris's intention at all, though you're right that philosophically his starting point is that immigration is not his greatest concern.
One of the moments for me in the first episode was when you say, rather charmingly, I am very lucky to have my own chapel. I just wanted to talk a bit about your faith, which comes through in the programmes. How important is your Catholic faith to you? Should faith have a bigger role in our politics?
I think the electorate are entitled to know what they're getting, and therefore politicians should be forthright about what they believe in. I'm very impressed by the Lord Chancellor saying that she will not support state-sponsored suicide because she is a Muslim. I think this is fantastic that she is standing up for her faith, and it strengthens her argument that it comes from a position of history, of established teaching. I think that impresses people, and I think she deserves a lot of credit for doing that. But my broader point is that when you vote for somebody, don't you have a right to know the whole package rather than just the edited highlights that people want to put out? I think politicians should be more clear about where they stand on things, and therefore how they will vote on the moral issues.
We wanted to do a little test with you.
I'm not necessarily going to do this. I've done one with Camilla before, and it was a disaster.
Yeah,
so
what did we do before? Was it grammar?
Latin. It was
Latin.
hopeless.
No, that was hopeless.
hopeless.
No, you'll thrive in this one. Trust us.
Now, I tested Camilla on this, and I'm not sure, Camilla, you did actually that well. So let's see if Jacob Rees Mogg
I'm not sure I am going to do this.
better. Now, this was a piece that we wrote, and we interviewed a chap called William Hanson, who has set himself up as the arbiter.
I've heard of him. Yes, I'm very keen he should come on my GB News programme. I think
he's on the
interesting.
TikTok, Jacob. So
TikTok.
He's on the TikTok. Yes.
On the clock.
And this was after Lady Glenconnor made the comment that fish knives were for the unrefined, because if you had fish knives, which were a Victorian invention, that meant that you had bought your cutlery and not inherited it from your aristocratic past, because before the Victorian era there were no fish knives. Anyway, this then led to a series of pieces that we did, one of which got a huge amount of response from our readers. But first of all, let's ask you about the fish knives question. Do you own a set of fish knives?
We have and own fish knives that were given to us by my wife's mother, who is the daughter of 1,000 earls.
There we go. So properly aristocratic.
Yeah,
so Lady Glenconnor to be
fish knife test tick.
Excellent. But let's go through some of the questions that were then asked by William Hanson. The first is tie clips, yes or no?
No.
All right. Now he says, this is where you actually got it wrong as well, Camilla.
Yeah.
He says you can wear a tie clip, but it should be beneath where you button up your jacket or your...
I'm not a great fan of male jewellery.
Fair enough. What about a little watch, pocket watch?
No.
Right. Signet ring?
No.
Chains around the neck? Now you've been watching the reality TV show with the Furies.
A watch and cufflinks seem to me to be quite enough.
Rees-Mogg tattoo?
Oh, what a good idea. Series 2.
Liquid soap?
Oh, you're revolting.
And now, this does actually touch on the programme itself. Eating on the street?
No.
You were seen walking around not only with a Greggs sandwich, but with apparently one of your happiest or most liked snacks from Greggs, an eclair And
yes, but I wasn't eating it in the
street. Also, you
street.
like a cream bun from Greg's?
Well, an eclair is a cream bun, and if they don't have an eclair, I'll have another cream bun.
Right.
Yes, but I wasn't eating it in the street. I carried it in the street to take it to the association office to eat it. But no, I don't eat it in the street.
Mounted televisions?
Mounted televisions depends on the room in the house, I suppose.
Some of your children did have mounted televisions.
Yeah, they do.
I noticed.
There is a mounted television.
Programme. And finally, do you ever serve Prosecco in lieu of champagne?
What is Prosecco? No. I'm afraid I think Prosecco is beastly stuff. I wouldn't dream of serving it.
I love it how you've just gone over that one, eating on the tube. Do you ever go on the tube?
Occasionally.
Oh.
How
does that go with fellow punters?
Well, I had to go to Lord's when there was some march going on by the tube. It was absolutely fine. And there were an awful lot of people on the tube who were also going to Lord's that day.
Personalised number plates?
I don't have one.
Hot tubs?
Hot tubs?
Have you ever been in a hot tub?
No.
Would you ever like to go in one?
No.
Right. And finally, I think we know the answer to this. Trainers. Do you own a pair?
No.
Should you?
I've got a pair probably of green flash gym shoes that I had when I was
Those
at
are very
school.
on trend.
Are they?
At the moment. They are.
They still exist. I'm very impressed.
We're assuming that you still don't own a pair of lounge pants, because this came up.
I don't even know what those are. No.
And you don't own a pair, we know that.
No lounge wear here. Jacob Rees Mogg, we're very excited to have spoken to you about this wonderful reality TV show, which we believe airs on Monday night. Do we know the time? Discovery Plus, I understand.
It's streaming, so
it's
from Monday, so you can watch the whole thing.
We can binge watch.
Binge, yes.
Do you binge watch anything?
Yes, sometimes. Mainly things that my children want to watch. And so what is it that Thomas has given us? The Young Sheldon we watched for hours and hours.
Oh, yes.
And then there was some American New York police thing.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
That's right, yes, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
Very funny.
But again, very funny. We watched hours and hours of that one after the other.
We are learning more about the Rees-Moggs as the minutes pass by. Jacob, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us on the Daily Tea. You may now tuck into your croissant as the cameras stop rolling.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.